Good morning and welcome to the interview on France 24. In France, the lockdown ended on the 11th of May, which is an opportunity for many businesses to reopen. But for hotels and restaurants, we'll have to wait. They'll have to wait, but until when? We don't know. Beginning of June, mid-June, end of June. Are restaurants ready to welcome their customers once again, and in what conditions? Will it already be too late for some restaurant owners? We are going to talk about this with our guest, Philippe Etchebest. Good morning, and thank you for being here. You are a Michelin-starred chef, a Meilleur Ouvrier de France, an emblematic personality of French television. So since the beginning of the lockdown, you've been working to alert the government and the general public on the state of the restaurant industry. How threatened is the restaurant industry in France?
Well, they're seriously threatened, and they've been that way ever since the beginning of this crisis. We're the first to close, and we're going to be the last to open. So throughout that entire period, as you can imagine, it's really tough. So obviously, right at the outset, I had a bit of an outburst, but it was a way for everyone to take stock of what was going to happen over the weeks to come. Because we have restaurant owners who have low cash levels, and that's because they've already been suffering for the past year and a half now because of all of the strikes that have been going on. So because of that, there was a real danger. The outburst, it was spread around the media, which was good because people heard the message. It sounded a bit alarmist, and some people said that I wasn't optimistic. But really, I am fundamentally optimistic. But I was just saying what the truth was, and if I wasn't going to say it, then who was? But it was good, the message was heard, and there have been reactions. But now, what we need to do is come up with solutions.
And so what solutions can you think of? You've proposed some solutions. You have 7 protocols that you've presented, because a health protocol has to be set up in order to be able to reopen these restaurants. So you've presented a protocol to the government. What does this protocol consist of?
So with the work group, we came up with a health protocol, and it was going to be sent through to the government because they asked us to come up with one. We came up with 7, in fact, and the government is going to group those different protocols together, and they'll publish a report on the different protective measures to be implemented. But before all of that, the first thing that has to be done, and the first thing that we actually worked on with our working group, and here I'm talking about my team, 20,000 restaurant owners, we sat down as a major conversation group to talk about it, and we had to come up with measures for all of these small and medium, even large companies who are going to have to be facing prolonged closure, and how we can support them. So we had to come up with supportive measures for those businesses. And then on that, we'll be able to bring in the protective measures, because without all of that, we won't be able to open up shop.
Can you tell us about these measures? How can we reassure customers and encourage them to come back to their restaurants? What can we set up so that restaurants become as normal as possible, a bit like they were before in any case?
Will it be back to normal? Will it be back to what it was before? In the way we work? No. Because we're going to have social distancing in place. We're going to have space between the tables. But again, all of the measures that we're talking about, we don't yet have them in stone. That's going to come a little later. People are talking about plexiglass, and these are things I've spoken about in the past. But remember, we're talking about lively venues where there used to be so much hubbub. People would converse, and there was a lot of chit-chat. But now these restaurants are going to look more like retirement homes, or if not hospitals. So, it's quite concerning for a lot of people. But I want to reassure our future clients. Are we going to have to reinvent things? Who knows what we're going to do? There's no point racking our brains over it too much, because what we know how to do is we know how to cook. That's our job. We know how to create a good environment, an enjoyable venue, about having customers come in through our doors and welcome them into a warm environment. That's what we can do. So we need to reassure them that we are going to put in the necessary health measures to make sure that everything is safe. Hygiene is something we know how to do, but we're going to have to do that tenfold. But to do that, we're going to have to be able to train people, and we will. With that, I really hope that customers are going to want to come back into our restaurants. But really, I have no doubt about that. I will have to admit, though, that things will be a little different. But the other thing is, how long is this all going to last?
Have restaurant owners felt supported by their government since the start of the lockdown?
The government has been supporting us. The government asked us for our help because they realized that there were a few things slipping through the cracks that they needed help with, and we were there for that. But the government really understood my outburst and they saw how serious the situation was. And then they took things in hand. But obviously, the government, they have so much they need to focus on. Sure, we've got the restaurant industry, but you've got tourism as a much bigger industry. But then I think what we want to see is all players playing their part. Insurers, banks, the European funds as well. There's so much out there, so many schemes and measures that can be put in place that can provide true help to our industry. But really, I do strongly believe that the government is doing its job, and they are, for example, taking on the brunt of the partial unemployment costs, which is going to be a huge cost, which is just another reason for us to having to go back to business.
What about restaurateurs' morale? You've spoken to restaurant owners very regularly, especially in your work group. Do they hold on to hope? Are they still optimistic?
Morale couldn't be any lower. To be perfectly honest, there have been 2 suicides in our ranks, and for us, it's awful. And what I really truly fear is that this crisis is going to have worse effects after the crisis than actually during the crisis. But maybe I'm wrong, and I sincerely hope so. I see these messages come in on a daily basis. Day in, day out, I have messages coming from restaurant owners who are in distress. They don't know how they can manage. They don't know who to call for help. And it's really tough. It's tough to get those messages because people are facing bankruptcy. But on top of that, they are really losing morale. They're in the pits and they're waiting for solutions to come forward. But those solutions just aren't coming fast enough.
So a few days ago, the Prime Minister, Philippe, stated that in departments that would remain green for the following 3 weeks, the restaurants might be able to be reopened at the beginning of June. This might be a first step, a small glimmer of hope. Of course, one still must remain very cautious. Is this something that has reassured you and your colleagues to hear this?
Sure, indeed, it is a step in the right direction. It's a first step. But whether we open or not, that depends on how disciplined the French men and women can be, all those men and women going back to work now. And I think it's a litmus test for us. But the President of the French Republic was very clear when we spoke with him via video conference in April. He said that there's no point in opening up restaurants if we're going to have closed doors again in 2 weeks, because that would have far worse consequences. But I think we need to be cautious. We need to be very cautious. We need to ensure that when we open doors, that we'll be doing so in the right conditions. We need to have the right support measures because obviously our businesses are going to be facing a drop by 50%, if not more, of their regular business. I've heard people talking about a phase-by-phase reopening where beachside resorts will open first and others later. We'll see how it's going to happen. But as I said, we're still waiting for concrete propositions and we will adapt.
A reopening restaurants will only be possible if easing the lockdown is successful. Do you trust the French people? Do you think they'll be disciplined enough?
I really do hope so. I really do hope so. I have great faith as well that they will be able to be disciplined because obviously our very future depends on it. And that's what we're waiting on seeing, and we're going to see how the virus changes in the future. But it's also cause for concern as well. It's really challenging for a lot of people. We understand because I've seen pictures of people in public transport. It's tough. But we have to be very careful. You have to protect yourselves and protect our loved ones. It goes without saying.
In countries such as Germany, Switzerland, Spain, some restaurants have reopened in certain regions and very gradually. But what do you think of this? Do you think that France is being too cautious?
You can always ask a question. Have we done too much? Has not enough been done? We'll count our sheep later. I think if we looked at Spain, for example, their lockdown measures were far stricter than in France, and the Spaniards followed it to the letter. And in the way things were done, we're going to see how they're going to ease the lockdown, and it's a way for us to observe what's happening elsewhere and adapt from that. Germany as well. Germany is a little different because their insurance companies were forced to actually help cover lost business costs for all companies, bars, restaurants, cafes, all of them, so that they could have some breathing room so that when they opened up, they could do so comfortably. And that's what we are currently lacking and we hope to have.
Now, on top of being a Michelin-starred chef, having the title of Meilleur Ouvrier de France, an emblematic French TV personality, and being a high-level athlete, you're also a musician. You played the drums with your group, Chief and the Gangs, and you've covered Under Pressure by David Bowie. We'll watch an excerpt and we'll talk about it later.
Pressure, pushing down on me, pressing down on you, no man has fall. Under pressure, that burns a building down, splits a family in two, puts people on streets. That's okay. That's the terror of knowing what this world is about. Watching some good friends scream and let me out.
Now, from the beginning of this video, the message is clear, the fight goes on, you remain steadfast. Is this a different way to spread your message?
Look, it actually started with my band to work on a cover of Let It Be by the Beatles. And it was perfect timing because it was right in time with the 50-year anniversary of their breakup. So Let It Be. It was a perfect message because we're going through an epidemic, a virus that was affecting us all, that we had to be put into lockdown. And now the message is one that we have to hammer, that we have to, we're there under pressure, that we have to be careful, be very cautious. You know, it's actually funny, I didn't realize you were going to play that video there because this morning I was actually going to wear a t-shirt with David Bowie, but my wife said, no, put a button-down shirt.
That would have been fitting.
Yeah, it would have been funny. It would have been funny. But really, aside from the messages that I want to convey, it's a way for me to have a bit of fun in the day because my days are spent. We're doing so much. From the moment I get up to the moment I go to bed, I'm in conversation with government, ministers, other restaurant owners. I'm finding ways on how to move forward, and it takes up so much of my time and energy and concentration because I have to be so concentrated for these calls. So much of my time and energy goes into that you know, sometimes I just need to let go of some of this pressure, blow off some steam, and it's a way for me to relax. It's so important for me.
We agree with you completely. Thank you very much for having given us your time. We hope that all French restaurants and all the restaurants around the world that have been abiding all these restrictive measures will be able to reopen soon so that we can make the most of them. Thank you very much for talking to us.
We'll pull through.
We hope so indeed. Have a very good day on France 24 and stay tuned.